Pete Best truly hated him more than anyone. Pete Best was born Randolph Peter Best on November 24th, 1941 in Madras, British India, where his father served as a marine engineer during World War II. His mother, Mona Best, was an ambitious and spirited woman who would later play a crucial role in the early development of the Beatles. When the war ended, the Best family relocated to Liverpool, England, where Mona opened the Casbah Coffee Club in the basement of their home on Hayman's Green. This small venue would become an essential launching pad for many young musicians of the late 1950s and early 1960s, including a group of local teenagers who would soon change music history forever. Pete grew up surrounded by rhythm, ambition, and the energy of post-war Liverpool, a city that pulsed with the beat of early rock and roll. Pete's interest in music developed naturally in this creative atmosphere. While attending collegiate grammar school, he began showing an affinity for percussion, often experimenting with makeshift drum kits. His quiet, brooding demeanor contrasted sharply with the more flamboyant personalities around him. Yet his determination and cool composure made him stand out. In 1959, when local teenagers John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison were forming a group called the Quarrymen, they often played at the Casbah Club. When they later decided to become a full-time rock and roll band, renaming themselves the Silver Beatles and eventually the Beatles, they found themselves in need of a permanent drummer. Pete Best was the natural choice. In August 1960, Pete officially joined the Beatles, solidifying the lineup that would embark on the band's first grueling performance stint in Hamburg, Germany. The Beatles' time in Hamburg became legendary. Weeks of all-night performances that shaped their style, stamina, and musical chemistry. Pete's powerful drumming helped drive the band's sound during these formative days. Fans and club owners in Hamburg were captivated by his looks and rhythmic intensity. His thick dark hair and serious expression made him something of a heartthrob among female fans. Musically, he provided the raw beat that carried the Beatles through marathon sessions and earned him respect from his bandmates, at least for a time. By 1962, tensions began to rise. After auditioning the band, its producer, George Martin, is said to have complained about the drumming of Pete and told the others that he wanted to employ a session drummer when recording. These, combined with personal frictions within the group, led to one of the most infamous decisions in music history. On August 16, 1962, Pete was called into the office of manager Brian Epstein, who informed him that he was being replaced by another drummer, Ringo Starr. The firing devastated Pete. He had been with the band through some of their toughest early years, helping them refine their stage act and earn their first major opportunities. Yet, just as they were on the verge of worldwide fame, he was left behind. In the aftermath, Pete Best went through years of deep emotional struggle. For a time, he avoided public appearances, suffering from depression and disillusionment. But he has rebuilt his life with quiet dignity. He formed other bands, including the Pete Best Band, and later stepped away from music entirely, working for the civil service for many years. Unlike some who might have been consumed by bitterness, Pete handled his fate with remarkable grace. He married Kathy, with whom he raised 2 daughters and maintained a relatively private life in Liverpool. With time, the stigma of being the man who almost was a Beatle transformed into a badge of respect. Fans began to envision Pete not as a forgotten figure, but as a vital part of the Beatles' foundation. The Beatles anthology, which was released in 1995, was a monumental moment not only in the history of music, but also in the life of Pete Best. For over 3 decades, Best lived in the shadow of the Beatles' extraordinary fame, dismissed from the band right before the band achieved worldwide success. The Anthology project, composed of a television documentary, a series of albums, and a detailed book, revisited the band's earliest days and featured some original recordings made before Ringo Starr joined. Among these were early demo tracks recorded both at Abbey Road Studios and at Decca Records with Pete Best on drums. When these recordings were officially released as part of the Beatles Anthology 1, Best was legally entitled to royalties due to his performance being included. For the first time since his departure in 1962, He received substantial financial compensation for his contributions during some of the band's most formative years. This moment was deeply symbolic. Not only did it provide Best with overdue acknowledgement of his place in shaping the sound of the early Beatles, but it was also redemption after years of being portrayed as the man who'd missed out on history. For the first time in decades, fans across the world celebrated this turn of events as a form of justice for a musician who had endured decades of obscurity and conjecture. Best himself would later admit that the royalties brought him both financial comfort and emotional satisfaction, reaffirming as they did that his place in Beatles history was genuine and unerasable. In 2008, Pete Best stepped further into the spotlight with the release of his album Hayman's Green, which met with surprising critical approval. The record, credited to the Pete Best Band, showcased a collection of rock songs that blended a modern sound with echoes of 1960 influences, a clear nod to the era in which Best first made his mark. The album's title paid homage to Hayman's Green, the Liverpool area where the Casbah Coffee Club had once stood, the very venue founded by his mother, Mona Best, and the birthplace of the Beatles' earliest performances. The project was a family affair that featured his younger brother, Rogue Best, on drums and co-production duties. Critics noted that Mon's Green reflected not only Pete's musical maturity, but also his reflective outlook on the long and winding path his life had taken since leaving the Beatles. Songs like Come With Me and Dream Me Home showed the emotional scope and artisanship that proved Pete Best was much more than the man before Ringo. This album provided an opportunity for him to recapture his identity as an artist per his terms, independent of the Beatles' legacy, yet connected with it forever. Pete Best's romantic journey with Kathy began in the year 1962 at one of the most exciting and transformational times in his life. It was at a Beatles party held at the legendary Cavern Club in Liverpool, a smoky, pulsating underground venue that had become the heart of the Muri Beat scene, where fate brought them together. That night, the cavern was full of energy, pulsating with the rhythm of rock and roll and the laughter of young dreamers who had no idea how much history was being made around them. Amidst the chaos of flashing lights, swaying bodies, and the hypnotic beat of the music, Pete noticed a girl whose joyful spirit and natural grace stood out for him. Kathy, a store staffer at the local Woolworth, was dancing freely and happily, fully absorbed into that moment. Pete himself was still feeling the aftermath of his very recent departure from the Beatles and riding waves of emotion when her warmth and honest smile caught his attention. He could not take his eyes off her through that night. There was something sincere and grounding about Kathy, which was different from the frenzy of fame and uncertainty surrounding his career at the time. Summoning his courage, he reached out to her, and the two of them started talking amidst the laughter and music. Their conversation easily flowed with shared humor, curiosity, and the spark of instant connection. Pete later recalled that it wasn't just her beauty that drew him in, but her kindness and unaffected nature, qualities that made him feel seen as the man behind the fame, not just as the former Beatles drummer. For Pete, who had suffered the heartbreak of being sacked from the band he helped form, Kathy represented comfort, understanding, and a fresh start. Their relationship blossomed, founded first and foremost on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than the flash of celebrity. Kathy was supportive, down to earth, grounding Pete as he began rebuilding his life and musical career. She stood by him through periods of reflection and reinvention, helping him regain confidence and purpose after the whirlwind of the Beatles' early years. In 1963, a year after they met, Pete and Kathy married in a small but sincere ceremony that reflected shared values, love, family, and resilience over glamour and publicity. The couple's bond would be lasting, a testament to their deep emotional connection and shared will to live a meaningful life beyond the spotlight. Together, Pete and Kathy built a home rooted in love and stability. Their marriage would be blessed with 2 daughters, both of whom became central to Pete's world. Family life gave him a sense of belonging and peace that fame had never offered. Pete often credited Kathy for being his anchor, The person who helped him find happiness after one of the most public professional setbacks in music history. While others might have been consumed by bitterness or nostalgia, Pete chose to look forward, throwing himself into his family and music on his own terms. Kathy's quiet strength and unwavering loyalty were instrumental in helping him maintain that positive outlook. When people talk about the early days of the Beatles, there's often a tinge of nostalgia. For young men from Liverpool chasing a dream that would change the course of music history. But behind that shining legend lay a storm of personal tension, bruised egos, and painful betrayal. And for Pete Best, drummer with the original Beatles, the deepest wound of all came not from watching fame slip through his fingers, but from a man he felt most wronged by, Paul McCartney. Best never hid his feelings about McCartney, and over the years spoke with an honesty that revealed just how deep that bitterness ran. In interviews, Pete Best was often asked to talk about his relationship with other Beatles, especially with John Lennon, George Harrison, and Paul McCartney. His tone would always change when Paul's name was mentioned. Of all of them, Pete once said, "Paul was the one I had the hardest time forgiving." Within that sentence alone lay decades of resentment. Resentment born from what Best saw as McCartney's quiet ambition and calculating nature beneath his polite smile. Pete explained that he and Paul were not close during their early days. "We were never mates the way John and I were." He admitted Paul was friendly enough, but there was always something about him, a sort of distance, like he was sizing everyone up. Pete Best had joined the Beatles in 1960 when they were just another struggling band from Liverpool trying to make a name for themselves in the smoky clubs of Hamburg. He was the one who gave them a solid beat, the one who helped them get their first steady gigs. And fans loved him for his moody good looks, turning him into something of a local heartthrob, something Paul McCartney, according to Pete, did not appreciate. "I could feel it," said Pete. "Paul didn't like that some of the girls in the audience were looking at me instead of him. It sounds petty now," he said, "but when you're young, jealousy can eat away at friendships." There were also musical differences between them. McCartney was a perfectionist and for precision and harmony, while Pete had a rougher, more natural style that fit the raw energy of their early performances. Paul wanted everything polished, Pete recalled, but the Beatles back then weren't about polish. We were about power. He used to criticize my drumming quietly behind my back rather than just telling me what he thought. I later found out he was one of the ones really pushing George Martin to get rid of me. That revelation that McCartney had played a part in his firing was something Pete would never fully forgive.